Give us a sense from a military point of view, which you know so well. What should we be preparing for?
Well, it's very difficult to know specifically, except we need to be vigilant given the seriousness of this particular action. I'm actually supportive of the action. You had a military commander who is an extraordinarily dangerous guy with a rich history countering the United States, including blood on his hands since as early as the early 2000s, who was in Iraq and, by all reports, planning additional attacks against the embassy. And so he was a legitimate target. And in that regard, the blow itself has badly damaged the national security apparatus in Iran. I do expect they will respond. One of the sayings that I certainly learned in the Middle East is at a time and place of our choosing. So it's hard to say how quickly they will respond, but certainly the rhetoric is indicative and the past is indicative that they will respond to this.
Admiral Mullen, for years I've heard, just as a civilian, that one of the concerns with Iran was if we actually did something with Iran, they had a lot of surrogates. We have Hezbollah, for example, in Lebanon. We've got people in Yemen. We've got various people in Syria as well. Has that been degraded to some extent? Because there are problems now in Lebanon that didn't exist before. Syria is in a civil war. Is it possible that they are not quite as powerful through their surrogates as they once were?
It may be possible, David, in those specific areas because of, let's say, dilution, if you will, with what's happened in Yemen. That said, they're very powerful, not just in Iran and in Iraq, but also in Syria. And Soleimani had a level of brilliance which extended his reach throughout the Middle East. So I would expect that, we really need to be on guard from any possible surrogate at this point. And I wouldn't expect Iran necessarily to respond conventionally, but I would expect them to respond through their terrorist network.
Do they have to be concerned about world opinion at all, Iran? That is to say, there are some targets that would be very soft, that would be very unpopular throughout the world, civilian targets that would really do a lot of damage to their reputation. Are they concerned about that at all?
One of the things that's led up to this has been the deterioration between the United States and Iran since the nuclear deal was walked away from on the part of the United States, and this maximum pressure campaign. And my concern has been I see almost no off ramps for Iran, and I'm not sure there are any off ramps for the U.S. And it has been steadily building. So that's the backdrop to get us to the latest episode, which is a very serious episode in and of itself. How we move forward here, and I heard briefly what Tom Pickering was talking about, can we get in place some legitimate diplomatic path to de-escalate this? And I haven't seen any indication of that even, up to this point before this incident. So I would hope we could do that, but I'm somewhat pessimistic with respect to being able to resolve it at this particular point in time.
In the meantime, obviously, the United States has to be doing what it can to protect itself. If you were back in uniform and you were responsible, what would you be looking at first? Is it things like gunboats in the Strait of Hormuz? Is it more attacks in Saudi Arabia and refineries, or would it be more far afield?
I think it would be all of the above, David. I think we certainly have the wherewithal to comprehensively defend ourselves, comprehensively prepare for all of those options, the ones you mentioned and others as well. We understand this part of the world very well. We've been there a long, long time. So certainly our forces to be on alert in that regard. In the media reporting, there's obviously been focus on places where we have troops, lots of sailors and families in Bahrain, obviously U.S. personnel, military personnel in Qatar. So all of those, I'm sure all of those places will be on very high alert.
To what extent do we need to be concerned with the regime in Iraq, not Iran, but Iraq? There's a report, for example, of a tweet from Senator Rubio that said that actually there was a coup that was afoot, that is really why we had to go after General Soleimani. Do we have to be trying to work with the government of Iraq and prop them up, as it were?
I would hope that we would still be able to work with the government of Iraq. We've invested there for a long time. I think the Trump administration has continued to try to figure out what are the best way to support what is still a nascent government, a nascent democracy with respect to Iraq, and that steps not be taken by the Iraqi leadership to see the U.S. out of the country, if you will. So I think we need to be working in every single domain, the diplomatic domain, the economic domain, and the military domain, to try to sustain the relationship we have with that country and figure a way to come down off the ladder in this crisis.